Welcome to the Sleepy Hub, a quiet corner of YouTube where gentle stories help you unwind. Whether you're here to rest, to drift off, or just to slow the pace of your day, you're in the right place. Tonight, we journey back in time to the far north, where the winters are long and the nights are endless. We will step quietly into a Viking longhouse. As the world beyond lies frozen and silent, you will discover how the Vikings endured these long months, not with haste or fear, but with resilience, ritual, and the comforting embrace of community. So before you settle in, please subscribe if you truly enjoy this content, and write on the comments where are you listening from and what time it is. Now, let your breathing slow and allow this story to carry you into the stillness of a winter night many centuries past. The first snow came softly, as if the sky itself had taken a deep, silent breath and then exhaled in 1,000 drifting flakes. The air was still, and every sound seemed to be wrapped in a muffled quiet, the kind of silence that feels alive, as though it is listening to you just as much as you're listening to it. In the small cluster of wooden longhouses huddled together at the base of the hills, the people had been preparing for this moment for weeks, knowing that once the snow began to fall in earnest, the long night would follow. Winter in the Viking lands was no fleeting visitor. It lingered, taking its time to settle in and wrap the world in darkness for months on end. The sun would soon hang low, barely lifting itself above the horizon before sinking again, leaving the days dim and the nights endless. The men had repaired the roof thatch to keep out the drifting snow. The women had brought in the last of the dried herbs from the racks, and the children had helped gather the final bundles of firewood. In this first night of true winter, there was no rush, no frantic movement, only the slow settling into a season that demanded patience, endurance, and the kind of quiet resilience that the people of the North had carried in their blood for generations. They knew what lay ahead. Months of cold so deep it could freeze the sea, winds sharp enough to bite through layers of fur, and nights so long they could make you forget the warmth of the sun. But they also knew the small pleasures that winter would bring. The shared warmth of the hearth, the taste of carefully prepared meals, the sound of voices telling old tales as the snow whispered against the walls. And so, as the flakes drifted down, the village gave itself over to the stillness, ready to meet the long night head-on. The heart of any Viking longhouse was the hearth, a long, open fire pit that burned day and night, its glow spilling over the packed earth floor and dancing against the curved timber walls. Without it, the winter would have been unbearable. The hearth was more than a source of heat. It was the center of life itself. Above it, smoke curled upward through the hole in the roof, leaving the air heavy with the scent of pine and birch. Around it, every task of winter unfolded. Women sat close, their hands busy spinning wool, weaving thick cloth, or mending garments worn thin by travel and work. Men worked on repairing tools, carving handles for axes, or whittling small wooden figures for the children. The youngest ones played quietly on fur rugs, their cheeks flushed from the warmth. The heat never reached the far corners of the longhouse, so sleeping areas were lined with thick furs and bodies huddled close at night to trap every bit of warmth. The smell of food, smoke, and wool mingled into a scent that was uniquely winter in the north, comforting in its familiarity. The fire was tended constantly, for to let it die would mean more than just cold. it would mean darkness. And in the Viking mind, darkness was not to be trusted. The world outside was frozen, silent and dangerous. But here, at the hearth, life thrived. It was where stories were told. Tales of gods and giants, of heroes who braved seas and snow, of ancestors who had faced winters even harsher than this one. These stories were not just entertainment. They were reminders that survival was a tradition, passed down like a family heirloom. As the winds howled outside and snow drifted high against the walls, the hearth's fires seemed to stand in quiet defiance, a glowing ember of life in the middle of an endless night. The survival of a Viking family depended on the careful preparation made in the months before winter's arrival. In the short, bright summers, every able hand worked to gather, grow, hunt, and preserve enough to see them through the long dark. By winter, their longhouses became storehouses of hard-earned bounty. Barrels of salted fish stacked against the walls, smoked cuts of pork and lamb hanging from the rafters, and bundles of dried herbs suspended from the beams to flavor the heavy stews that simmered over the hearth. Food was not merely sustenance. It was comfort in tangible form. Each mouthful a reassurance that they had prepared well enough to last until spring. Meals were eaten slowly, with gratitude, and often shared with neighbors or travelers, hospitality being a deeply rooted virtue, especially in a land where to be turned away in winter, it could mean death. Hunting did not stop entirely. On rare days when the weather eased, men might take to the forests to set snares for hares or venture onto frozen lakes to cut holes for fishing. The cold made every breath sting, but the reward of fresh meat was worth the effort. Children, too, played their part, helping to grind grain, fetch snow to melt for water, or gather twigs and pine cones to feed the fire. At night, when the stew pot hung over the flames and the scent of slow-cooked fish or game filled the longhouse, there was a sense of unity. People leaning close, hands wrapped around wooden bowls, steam rising in the air as stories flowed as freely as the mead. Outside, the snow lay heavy, and the wind rattled the shutters. But inside, there was warmth, nourishment, and the quiet certainty that they could endure whatever the long winter had yet to bring. Surviving the Viking winter was not only a matter of having enough food, it was also about mastering the art of keeping the cold from stealing the body's warmth. In a land where icy winds could cut like a blade and frost could creep into a longhouse through the smallest cracks, clothing was more than adornment. It was armor against nature's relentless chill. The base of every winter wardrobe was wool, the Vikings' most trusted ally, thickly woven from the fleece of hardy sheep that roamed their pastures in the warmer months. Wool was prized for its ability to hold heat even when damp. A hunter's winter cloak, lined with fur and clasped at the shoulder with a sturdy brooch, could turn back even the most biting wind. Leather, too, played its part, soft and pliable for gloves, thick and rugged for boots, often lined with fur to keep toes from numbing in the snow. Hats were essential. Many were fashioned from wool and pulled low over the ears, or from animal hide with fur turned inward for extra protection. Even children, bundled in smaller versions of adult garments, were wrapped like precious treasures in layers of warmth before venturing outside to fetch water or tend to animals. Dressing for winter was a ritual in itself. Each layer tied or pinned in place, each fastening checked before stepping into the deep, white silence beyond the longhouse door. Inside, cloaks might be hung near the fire to dry, their smoky scent mingling with the aroma of the evening meal. And on the longest nights, when the winds howled over the frozen fjords. Those cloaks became blankets, spread over sleeping forms to trap body heat. Warmth was survival, and survival was the first step towards seeing the return of the sun. At the center of every Viking longhouse, beneath the great wooden beams and the thatched or turf-covered roof, burned the hearth, a low, open fire that was far more than a source of heat. It was the heart of the home, the silent guardian that pushed back the cold and kept the darkness from swallowing the family whole. The hearth was tended constantly, its flames never allowed to die out entirely. During the day, someone, often an older member of the household or a watchful child, would feed it with carefully split logs, dried in the warmer months and stacked against the longhouse wall. At night, the fire was banked, buried under a mound of glowing embers and ash, so it could smolder quietly until morning, ready to flare to life again with a few well-placed twigs and a careful breath. People worked by its light, mending nets, carving wood, or spinning wool. Each task made easier by the warmth at their backs. On bitter nights, when the wind's wails seeped through the walls, families gathered closer, their shoulders brushing, voices low. Stories unfolding in tones meant to soothe rather than stir. The fire was more than practical. It was deeply symbolic, a thread connecting the living to those who came before. A hearth kept burning was a home alive, a place where kinship and memory could endure even when the world outside was locked in frost and silence. And so it was guarded with quiet devotion, tended like a living creature whose warmth was life itself. In that glowing circle of light, the endless winter seemed to pause, if only for a moment, leaving the family in a cocoon of safety until the pale sun returned. Long before the first frost bit at the grass, Vikings understood that the dark months would test not just their endurance, but their foresight. Summer and autumn were seasons of preparation, harvesting barley and rye, salting fish and meat, and storing vegetables in cool, dry pits beneath the earth. Clay jars held honey, butter, and dried berries. Sacks of grain were stacked against the walls, ready to be ground into flour for bread baked on flat stones beside the fire. Meat hung from rafters, the smoky scent of preservation mingling with the hearth's steady perfume. This abundance was not indulgence. It was survival calculated with precision. Yet even in this careful economy of resources, there was room for moments of joy. Midwinter brought the festival of Yule, a time when the cold outside seemed to make the warmth within all the richer. Families and neighbors gathered in the largest longhouse or hall available, bringing contributions from their stores. A great boar might be roasted over the fire, its fat sizzling into the flames, while steaming bowls of stew were passed from hand to hand. These feasts were not hurried affairs. They were long, slow evenings where the dark pressed in beyond the walls. But inside there was laughter, music, and the comfort of human voices. The sharing of food was an act of solidarity, a silent promise that no one would be left hungry while the ice held the land. In these moments, survival was not merely about enduring the winter. It was about finding warmth in each other, in the bonds of community, and in the memory of brighter days to come. When the snow piled high against the walls and the world outside seemed sealed in ice, the Vikings turned inward, not just into their homes, but into a rhythm of life shaped by the stillness of winter. The longhouse became more than shelter. It was a workshop, a place where patient hands transformed raw materials into the tools, clothing, and treasures that would carry them through the year. Men repaired weapons dulled by the last season's raids or hunts, sharpening blades by firelight and mending shields with fresh leather bindings. Women sat in small circles, their laps covered in wool spun from the summer sheep shearing, fingers deftly weaving threads into warm tunics and thick cloaks. Children, too, had their part to play, carving small wooden toys, learning stitches, or helping to twist ropes from plant fibers stored since harvest. Outside, the land lay in deep slumber, but inside, there was a hum of quiet industry, the kind of work that asked for patience and rewarded with endurance. Candles made from animal fat or fish oil flickered in the dim light, their glow casting slow shadows across the walls, and the scent of wood smoke clung to everything, clothes, hair, and skin alike. Winter was a time to mend not only tools and garments, but also stories and relationships. To sit beside someone you might not see clearly during the chaos of summer work and talk in low voices while hands stayed busy. In the lull of the dark months, bonds were strengthened, traditions passed down, and life made ready for the turning of the seasons. In this way, the Vikings did not simply endure winter. They wove it into the fabric of their lives, each stitch, carving, and polished blade, a quiet act of defiance against the cold. After months of darkness and cold, the first hints of spring began to stir quietly beneath the surface. Slowly, the frozen fjords cracked, their icy shells splintering to reveal the dark, cold water below, a sign that the world was beginning to breathe again. Inside the longhouses, where fires had burned steadily through the long winter nights, there was a growing sense of anticipation mingled with relief. Outside, the animals began to stir. Cattle shifted uneasily in their shelters, and birds returned in small flocks, their songs tentative at first, then growing bolder. The snow, once a thick, unbroken blanket, softened and melted into rivulets that trickled through the earth, awakening seeds long buried beneath. For the Vikings, the return of light was more than a change in weather. It was a renewal of life itself, a reminder that the long night was never permanent. Stories told beside the hearth took on new meaning as elders spoke of cycles and seasons, of hardships faced and overcome. Families began to plan once again for fishing trips, for planting and tending fields, for voyages across the seas that had been impossible during winter's reign. The longhouse doors, once shut tight against the cold, were open to let fresh air and hope inside. And as the sun climbed higher each day, the Vikings stepped outside with a quiet gratitude, ready to meet the warmth and light of the new season. The long winter was behind them, but its lessons endured. In the stories they told, the skills they honed, and the resilience that would carry them through whatever future storms might come. As the first light of spring gently fills the sky, we are reminded of the quiet strength found in enduring the longest nights. The Vikings, wrapped in warmth and stories, met the darkness with steady hearts and hands busy with care. Their world was harsh, but within their longhouses, fires burned bright, and hope was kept alive in every shared meal and whispered tale. May the peaceful rhythm of seasons remind you that even in the deepest darkness, warmth and renewal awaits. Good night.